Hey guys, Aaron here from Nerd Crave, and I want to talk about that burning anxiety that we feel as a system that we love and cherish. A video game system comes to the end of its lifespan, and we worry that eventually that wonderful time that we had with the system is going to come to an end, and that anxiety of what's going to come next and are our favorite experiences going to be preserved. We've been through this. If you've been around long enough, you've been through this several times with systems like the PS3 moving on to the PS4 and the PS4 moving on to the PS5, and seeing things like the 3DS get shut down last year, and the Wii U, and Nintendo's recent news that they're not going to be supporting online play on those consoles anymore. And that brings on quite a bit of anxiety for people who really love these games, and not everyone out there is technically proficient enough to figure out how to modify or hack their consoles. A lot of people aren't really morally comfortable with downloading ROMs, piracy, all that sort of thing. So what happens to those gamers out there that are sort of isolated from their favorite things as we move on, as technology marches further and further into the future, generation after generation after generation? Everybody's talking now about the Nintendo Switch 2, and it seems rumored that it's likely to be launching holiday of 2024, and that we're probably going to see an announcement for the next Switch within the first 3 or 4 months of 2024, around maybe Nintendo's fiscal anniversary in March there, as their fiscal year wraps up. So what is the future for the Nintendo Switch, a system that so many people call their favorite system of all time? So many friends of mine that I know, even Femtrooper just did a video today about her top 5 favorite consoles of all time, and the Switch was her #1 on that list.
I started thinking about all the consoles I owned, all the consoles I've played, and which ones stood out the most to me.
Great video, by the way, Paige, and it really brings to mind, what are we going to do as the Nintendo Switch gets sunset? Too often when these things happen, when these systems move towards their end-of-life phase, people will tend to trade in their old consoles, their old games, and move forward into the new stuff. And this is what really drives the secondary market, because then a generation later, people want to come back to the things that they loved 7, 8, 10, 15 years ago, and they don't have it anymore, and they don't have access to the stuff anymore. And maybe they go out and buy a 3DS. Maybe somebody gets nostalgic for the 3DS today, and they go out and they buy a 3DS on the secondary market, expecting to be able to live out the way that they did when they had it in 2011 or whenever, right? And they pick it up and they go to sign into the eShop, and the eShop is closed. Of course, those of us who have been following this situation, those of us who are in the gaming community, we were aware, and we had plenty of notice of when the 3DS was going to shut down, and plenty of notice to download the games that we wanted to download and do our updates and things like that. But what happens now to that person coming back to the 3DS in their mid-20s, let's say, and they go out and purchase a 3DS and a copy of Animal Crossing New Leaf, for example, and they bring it home and they remember all the content that they had back in the day, with amiibos and all of that kind of thing, and they realize that they can't relive that anymore because the Welcome Amiibo DLC, they can't download anymore. Now, you can purchase a physical copy of Animal Crossing with the Welcome Amiibo DLC included, but perhaps that person doesn't know that, and they're put in that situation of disappointment and, obviously not really understanding how these things work, looking now at the Nintendo Switch. And so many people are having the anxiety for the same thing, because Nintendo has had a track record of shutting these things down. The Wii, the Wii U, the DSi, the 3DS, these things get shut down and sunset a few years after the next generation. So people have a lot of anxiety now for the Nintendo Switch and when that's going to, end up cutting off. I am here today to bring you good news speculation, though. This is, of course, speculation, but I think it is informed speculation, if you will, an educated guess. And my thought is that the Nintendo Switch as a platform is going to outlive any other platform that we are familiar with today. Maybe it will be pretty similar to, say, the Xbox One or the PS4. I believe both of those platforms are going to last another several years as well. We're looking at the longest cross-gen period in history right now because of the after effects of the COVID pandemic. And game development cycles taking so much longer with all the remote work and stuff during the pandemic. A lot of games that were supposed to come out in 2021 have been pushed back to 2023 and even 2024. And so we're seeing the longest cross-gen period that has ever been seen, really, in any kind of recent memory, where games to this day, 3 years almost after the release of the PS5, we are still getting games regularly. Like, almost all the games are getting released on PS4 as well as PS5. And that mostly goes for the Xbox One and Xbox Series as well. Game Pass is still supported on the Xbox One. I use my Xbox One myself, and a lot of games, as they come out to Game Pass, they work on the Xbox One as well as the Xbox Series consoles. Not everything, but pretty darn close to everything. And so, you know, we're going to see that trend, I believe, continue with the Nintendo Switch as the Switch ages, as we move into the end of 2024, and hopefully we do get to see that new generation, what Nintendo has for us, you know, over the horizon. But keeping tabs on the Nintendo Switch, see, the thing is, the Switch doesn't need to go anywhere, and I've often said we don't really even need another generation of Switch right now. In some ways we do. Technically, graphically speaking, the Switch is starting to show its age. It's long in the tooth. A lot of games that are getting ported to it recently, like Mortal Kombat 1, for example, is an absolute disaster because as development cycles move on and they're developing for better hardware like the PS5 and stuff, it becomes much, much harder to detune, to demaster those games and get them to work on the Switch. So having new hardware is important in a lot of ways. But what the Switch does right now, it does very, very well, and that is playing a lot of those indie games, a lot of those cartoon graphic style games like the Nintendo first-party games. You can't tell me, Kirby and the Forgotten Land from last year looks and runs great. Mario Odyssey looks and runs great. Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, I'd be pretty interested to see that have an HD upscale on the next system, running at higher frame rates and stuff like that. But the game still runs pretty respectably considering. But my point with all of this is, I think what's going to end up happening here is that the Nintendo Switch's lifespan is going to end up tailing off for a really long time. And, we look at precedents like limited run games and their support of the PlayStation Vita, for example. Limited run games created physical games, indie games especially, that weren't ever released as physical games. And they released physical copies of those games for the PlayStation Vita long after other publishers had stopped producing games for the PS Vita. Sony abandoned the PS Vita very quickly, and it was pretty much dead in the water, except for a very supportive community of fans who would buy just about anything that would come out. So just to tie everything together after 8.5 minutes of my aimless rambling here, the Nintendo Switch's lifespan, I think, is going to be remarkably long because of a variety of factors here. For one thing, the Switch has a huge install base, over 130 million, and I think Nintendo is trying to get the Switch to the place where it is the best-selling console of all time. I think they want to have, that badge of honor. They want to keep selling the Switch as long as possible. They want to sell another 20-25 million Switches at least and beat the record of the PS2 and the Nintendo DS, which are both in 140 to 150 million consoles sold range. So I think Nintendo themselves wants to continue selling the Nintendo Switch, and I think it's going to take a while and probably some significant discounts to get the Switch over that hurdle, over that 155 million, because people are beginning to expect that there is going to be another generation coming out pretty soon, and I think sales of physical consoles are probably going to be tapering off pretty quickly here as we come into the next year or so. But I think Nintendo is going to probably, if we look at the end of the 3DS's life cycle, we saw all kinds of special editions come out. That's when we saw the 2DS XL come out, for example, right towards the end of the life cycle. All kinds of special edition variants with different characters and things like that on them. So I think the Switch is probably coming into a period of time now where we're going to start seeing them do a whole bunch of things to incentivize people to buy second and third consoles. Remember what they did with the 3DS XL, where they didn't even include a charger in there, because in their words themselves, they said, oh, you've probably got another charger lying around the house, right? They're expecting that this is going to be a second console for you. So in the same way, I expect to see a push throughout 2024, probably 2025, where Nintendo are pushing special edition variants, maybe stripped down variants, thinking of the Wii Mini that was only available in Canada at the beginning for a price point of $99, and it had a bunch of features stripped out. It didn't play GameCube games, and it didn't have a lot of other stuff. But, you know, I expect to see something like that happen with the Switch, which is going to extend the period that Nintendo is actively supporting the Switch. As long as they're selling it, they're going to be supporting it. Right? There's my logic. And then after that period, during this period, we're going to see what has been, you know, pretty common in the last couple generations, which is a cross-gen period. We saw that between the 3DS and the Switch, but the 3DS died off really, really quickly because it was really long in the tooth itself when the Switch came out, and the Switch was very exciting, but we still did see things come out on the 3DS after the Switch was launched, and we're going to see that with the Switch 2, where there's still going to be official Nintendo releases on the Switch that maybe are paralleled on the Switch 2, where we have two different versions of the game, thinking of Twilight Princess on the GameCube and on the Wii, for example, right? Just to think of ways that Nintendo has done this in the past. So the precedent is set. There's definitely going to be a cross-gen period. So I'm thinking Nintendo's going to continue selling Switch systems at least until the end of 2025 before they start blowing them out. And then they're probably going to support the system with first-party titles at least until the end of 2026. That is my guess right now. What really comes into play here are not just third-party publishers, because the third-party publishers could potentially support this longer. Think of something like a Capcom or a Konami, for example, how they're putting out collections of older games. You know, Konami's putting out the Metal Gear Solid collection. Capcom's been putting out Street Fighter collections and things of that nature, right? There is no reason why those collections of 16-bit games and PS1 style games could not continue to come out on the Nintendo Switch indefinitely. 130 plus million people have a Nintendo Switch, and that is a huge install base to sell to, right? So there is no reason why those third-party publishers could not still put games that are, you know, able to run on the Nintendo Switch onto the console going beyond 2025, 2026. And then the last piece of the puzzle, of course, is these limited run companies, the companies like your Strictly Limiteds and your limited run games, who their sole purpose in existing in this world is to create physical copies of games and put them on systems that maybe you wouldn't expect them to be on. And to make physical versions of these games available, but at the same time, they also release digital versions of these games if necessary. For example, Limited Run right now is running the Jurassic Park games through the Carbon engine and bringing them forward. All of those SNES titles and Genesis titles, those games are getting brought forward to the Switch as we speak. And there's no reason that that needs to stop anytime soon. As long as there is a market of customers there who are hungry to consume this stuff, these companies are going to keep creating content for those customers. So I think it is pretty reasonable to assume that the Switch is going to continue to have an active ecosystem, probably approaching up until, I would say, 2027, 2028 would not be an exaggeration. Microsoft, in some leaks, basically leaked that their next generation they were expecting to be in 2028. So I think we're probably likely going to see a PS6 and an Xbox Series, whatever the hell they call it this time, 720 or something, who knows, right? But I think it's pretty likely that the next generation of the big boy consoles, as it were, is going to be 2028. So would I be surprised if the Switch was still kicking around in 2027, 2028? No, I wouldn't be surprised at all. Especially now that Nintendo has this new Nintendo account system that they fostered with the Switch. And now that we have things like the Nintendo Online subscription, right? Even if only to support the subscribers that they still have, you know, for me, if they carry that subscription service over to the new console, the Switch 2 or whatever it's called, but it is still being supported on the Switch, and I can pick up, you know, where I left off with my, you know, NES or Super NES games that I'm playing on one console and pick it up and carry it on the other console through cloud saves or whatever, I think that would be fantastic. And I think if they're still receiving subscription money from people who own Switches, they're going to continue to support it. And I think now that they've got this account system in play that can be carried forward indefinitely, because the account system exists outside of the console, unlike, you know, with the Wii and such like that. So I think it is pretty reasonable to assume that this is going to be a very long generation indeed, and that you do not need to worry. You can dial down the anxiety, because the Nintendo Switch is going to be, and this is the quotable quote here, the Nintendo Switch is going to be relevant until 2028 or beyond.
I can still have access to my Switch 10 years from now, as long as it's still working. What do you guys think? Let me know down in the comments. Am I crazy off base here, or am I right to assume that the Switch could potentially last longer than any console in history? Thanks so much, guys. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Stay classy.